The story of the British Empire begins not with armies, but with ships, tall wooden vessels, billowing white sails, pushed out from the shores of a small island nation, driven by the winds of ambition and the currents of trade. Sailors, merchants, explorers peered from their decks, searching for new routes to fabled lands. Their initial goal was commerce, not conquest. They sought the spices of the East, the silks of China, and the untold riches beyond the known horizons. These early voyages were perilous. Storms, disease, the vast unforgiving emptiness of the open ocean. Yet the rewards were immense, fortunes for the investors, and fame for the captains who dared to venture forth. On distant coastlines, ships made their first cautious landfalls. At the heart of the empire was a relentless and highly organized extraction of resources. The lands under British control were seen as a vast storehouse of natural wealth waiting to be harvested for the benefit of the metropole. From the verdant hills of Assam, from Ceylon, the ships were laden with chests of tea, a commodity that would transform the social habits of Britain. From the Indian subcontinent, fine cotton textiles, pepper, cloves, indigo dyes. The demand for these goods was insatiable. They flowed into British ports, feeding the nation's growing industries and satisfying the tastes of its burgeoning middle class. The entire enterprise was a logistical marvel, a one-way river of wealth towards Britain. In other corners, the earth was made to yield its treasures. In South Africa, diamonds, now gold, mines were sunk deep. Armies of laborers toiled in dangerous conditions, pulling sparkling stones and glittering ore from the rock. From the Caribbean, sugar, grown on vast plantations under slavery in Malaya, forests replaced by rubber plantations, supplying a crucial industrial material. These raw materials were shipped thousands of miles to British factories. Trade generated immense profits for shipping companies, banks, and insurance firms. Colonies produced raw materials. Britain controlled the manufacturing, the shipping, and the profits. To facilitate the immense task of moving resources and administering vast territories, the British embarked on monumental engineering projects. They laid thousands of miles of railway tracks across plains, through jungles and over mountains. These were the iron veins of the empire, a revolutionary technology that transformed the landscape and the nature of colonial rule. In India, the railway network was one of the largest in the world, a colossal undertaking of capital and labor. Trains carried raw cotton from interior fields to coastal ports with unprecedented speed. They also moved troops quickly to quell unrest. Railways as tools of exploitation and control. Alongside railways, the British built other vital infrastructure. They dredged harbours for larger steamships, built extensive canals for irrigation and transport, and strung telegraph wires across continents. The Suez Canal in Egypt, financed and later controlled by the British, dramatically shortened the sea voyage to India. These projects were presented as feats of progress, bringing modernity and development to the colonies. While they did create jobs and new technologies, their primary purpose was to serve British interests. Routes linked production areas to export points, not local communities. Administrative centres reshaped the landscape. In New Delhi, Salisbury and Nairobi, grand government buildings rose. High domes, classical columns, post offices, courthouses and police stations in standardized fashion, expensive to build and maintain, costs borne by colonial subjects through taxes on land, salt and income. The British Empire was not built on force and infrastructure alone. It was also an engine of profound cultural and social change. A key instrument was the introduction of a British-style education system. Schools were established, initially by missionaries and later by the colonial government, to create a new class of local administrators, clerks and professionals. These institutions taught the English language, British history and Western science. For some, education offered social mobility and employment. It also distanced many from their own cultural heritage. British law swept aside complex local traditions, replacing them with English common law. British judges presided over courts where proceedings were conducted in English, providing a uniform system for resolving commercial disputes and maintaining public order. Private land ownership was codified, leading to dispossession of communities holding land in common. English became the language of government, higher education, and international commerce. Proficiency in English was a prerequisite for influence, a common tongue that could forge national identity and challenge colonial rule. But it marginalized indigenous languages and elevated Western ways of thinking. British dress, sports like cricket, and social etiquette were adopted by local elites. New hierarchies formed, while framed as a civilizing mission. The impact on local cultures was disruptive. Ancient traditions eroded, social structures upended, cultural inferiority instilled. The empire left its mark not only on the land, but on the minds and identities of the people it ruled. Despite the overwhelming power of the British Empire, its rule was never passively accepted. From the earliest days, there was resistance. It took many forms: small, everyday acts of defiance and large-scale armed rebellions. Farmers refused unjust taxes, dock workers organized strikes for better wages. Subtle and localized, yet a constant simmering discontent. Quiet whispers of dissent reminded that control was never absolute. Resistance grew more organized and articulate. A generation used the colonizers' language and ideas, liberty, democracy, national self-determination, to argue against rule. In India, leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru mobilized millions with protests, boycotts, and non-violent civil disobedience. Elsewhere, armed uprisings were often brutally suppressed, shook the colonial establishment. From the Indian Mutiny of 1857 to the Anglo-Zulu War and the Mau Mau uprising, the empire rested on force. Conflicts proved costly in lives and resources. Resistance was also cultural, rediscovering traditions, languages, and histories. Artists fostered pride and identities distinct from the colonizer. Political agitation, armed struggle, and cultural renaissance formed a tide that unraveled the imperial structure. The end of the British Empire, when it came, happened with surprising speed. 2 world wars left Britain economically exhausted and militarily overstretched. The United States and the Soviet Union opposed old-style colonialism. Nationalist movements could no longer be ignored or suppressed. Moral and economic justifications for empire were crumbling. The deliberate withdrawal began in earnest. In 1947, India, the jewel in the crown, became independent. Partition into India and Pakistan brought tragic violence and mass migration. Over 2 decades, a wave of decolonization swept the globe. Everywhere the Union Jack was lowered and new flags rose via negotiation or struggle. Some exits were brutal and scarring. By the late 1960s, most of the empire was dismantled. In its place, the Commonwealth emerged. The age of empire was over. Former colonies became sovereign nations, free to chart their own course. The lowering of the flag marked a new world order. Today, more than half a century after the empire's decline, its legacy remains deeply embedded. A complex inheritance, tangible connections, and persistent problems. Railways, ports, and government buildings still form the backbone of transportation and administration. English facilitates global communication, commerce, and culture. Legal and political systems bear a British imprint. Parliamentary democracy and common law shape civic life. Economies were structured for extraction and to discourage local manufacturing. Many still struggle with dependency and limited diversification. Colonial borders ignored ethnic, linguistic, and religious realities, fueling conflicts that persist. Rigid hierarchies of race and culture left deep psychological scars. Identity, race, and power remain contested. Migration transformed Britain into a multicultural nation still grappling with its imperial past. Wealth from empire helped build Britain at great cost to colonized peoples. To understand today's borders, languages, and economies is to understand the British Empire. A history of ambition and cruelty, progress and exploitation, connection and division.